I want to thank you guys all for being with me here. Today, we're going to be talking about education. And I want to talk a little bit about the educational system, where it started from, and where it is currently in our lives. We have a special guest here today, and she's an expert in education. Her career was about education. And we will talk about her life growing up in separate but equal schools, and then going on to achieve a life in the field of education. So I want to give you a little history about education and how it started here in the United States. In the 19th century, there was a movement to establish public schools, which would be free and open to all the children. Now, this movement was driven part by the belief that education was essential for economic progress, and in part by concerns that the growing number of immigrants, the immigrant children, were not receiving any education. The first state to establish a system of public education was Massachusetts, and that was back in 1837. Other states followed suit, and compulsory education laws were enacted in many states that required children to attend school for a certain number of years. Fast forward to the 20th century, there was a push for education reform, and the focus of this was making education more practical and relevant to the needs of the world that was changing around them. So this led to more of a push towards vocational and educational programs in the establishment of what we now call junior high schools. The latter half of the 20th century, there was sort of a renewed interest on equal access to children. Now, this was around the time that the civil rights movement was coming about, and the civil rights movement played a significant role in this effort. This led to desegregation of schools. Now, by desegregation, I mean that whites were going to one school, the blacks were going to another school. So during the time of civil rights, that all came about, requiring fair education for both parties, for both people of color and non-color. So a unifying way and system to educate people in the United States. It also led to the establishment of programs such as a Head Start to provide early childhood education for the disadvantaged people, meaning the lower class people, meaning Black people, people of color, who hadn't gotten a chance to go to school with the whites because they were being taught two separate things. Today, the education system in the United States sort of continues to grow and evolve and change, with the ongoing debates about issues such as funding for the schools and where those funds are allocated, the actual curriculum of schools, and we see that playing out in so many different ways, as well as standardized testing. The standardized testing to evaluate where the students are at this point and that point in their education, and how they proceed on to higher education. So there's sort of a standard way to determine, each individual student, to make them, be at a level where they can go on to get higher education, or they come out of school knowing that everyone has had the same education and been exposed to the same information, to say. So that's the history of our education system. And today's guest, as I said, is an expert in the education field, and she'll be coming up next. So stick around. This is OneMicNite. I'm Marcos Luis. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of OneMicNite. If it's your first time, I want to welcome you very much and thank you for stopping by. This is OneMicNite, the podcast that brings you stories of artists and people on their journey, helping to guide, answer questions, and motivate you in life and the business. Of course, you already know my name is Marcos Luis. I'm the host of the show. And today's episode, I've been really inspired and intrigued by some things that have happened this week at the Harlem International Film Festival. I saw a film and it was talking about education and the school system. So education has always been a big part of my life in terms of what I do and the upbringing I had with education. And I wanted to investigate a little bit more and talk a little bit more about the history of education in this country, where it came from and how it has evolved to our present day. So I invited a guest today. My guest today is a former dean of Portland Community College. She's an expert in education. She's also the former dean of Community College of Allegheny County, Homeward Rushton branch, and she was also the valedictorian of her own university. So please welcome my guest today, Fran Howse. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. So thank you for having me.
I'm so happy to have you here. You don't know how long I've wanted to have you here, so I'm glad you can make it. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So my first question is, who is Fran Howse in education?
Well, as you said, education was always very important in my home as I grew up. As a matter of fact, my mother said, "You're not anything if you're not educated." And she would not accept anything less than the best. And she did that very seriously. So I took her seriously and I applied myself, which wasn't difficult because I found that I had a love for reading and research. At that point, I wasn't even sure what research was, but I was always curious. So I had questions, I had to find answers. And that was sort of the impetus of what ended up happening that I had not planned to have happen. It sort of evolved into my former careers. But I do remember particularly when I was in kindergarten, and I had a problem being quiet. Everybody knew that. And so I was in kindergarten, and at that point, we're talking separate but equal schools at that point. And my mother found this teacher who had a kindergarten in her attic, and she had like 20 or so kids. So she got me in there.
A kindergarten in the attic?
In the attic of her home, yes.
Wow. What was that like?
It was interesting. I learned a lot, but I've always been a fast learner, and after I've learned something, then I start talking, and that was an issue. But and I did. I talked a lot when I shouldn't have, And this one day, I was not talking, and she blamed me because somebody near me was talking, called me up, and at that point, capital punishment was acceptable. And so she calls me up, grabs my little hand and gets a ruler and hits me in my little hand 4 or 5 times with it. And the very next morning, when my mother had this school patrol mother who took me to school every day because my mother worked. And when I got there, I refused to go inside. Now here I am, 5 years old, standing outside the door, arms and legs spread out.
Oh boy, a tantrum.
Or push me in. She had to take me back home to my grandmother. Now my grandmother, was I don't know. She was funny. She was a funny lady, but she was serious as well. So once my mother came home and she said, "Why wouldn't you go in?" I said, "Because she said I was talking and I wasn't talking, and she spanked me in my hand, and I'm not going back in there." And she believed me. I said I was going to do it every day if I had to, because that lady was not fair. And my older sister was in 2nd grade at the time, and she called her teacher to find out if something she knew. She said, "Well, let her come in and go to school with her. I don't care." Now, this would never happen these days, never. And she said, "I have a couple of other students pupils whose siblings are here, and they can go back and play. You have a playroom in the closet with toys and things like that, big storage room in the closet. And she said, but they have to be quiet. My mother was saying, oh my goodness. So the teacher also allowed us to come out and sit with the second graders if we wanted to learn something.
If you were quiet.
You had to be quiet. No, because she would put you back in the little storage room. And so I sat out there, and like I said, I learned things very quickly. So she was teaching the second graders, and I picked all this stuff up, and I went back in the storage room to play while they were still dealing with it. And so I would come out when I thought something new was happening, and I would learn that. And by the end of the school year, the teacher recommended to the principal that I be moved to third grade because I had mastered second grade. And he never heard of such, he said. So no, not going to happen. So I had to go back. I had to go to first grade.
Oh, wow.
I already knew what was in first grade. Then I had to go to second grade. I already knew what was in second grade. And by this time, I'd started reading everything I could. And, it didn't, I guess it didn't bother me then as much as it bothers me now in retrospect.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I felt like, I can't remember this, Welcome Back, Kotter was a TV show, and there was Horshack in there. And every time he wanted to say something, he'd go, ooh, 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 ooh. And then when the teacher asked a question, that was pretty much me. I'm raising my hand. She never called on me. She refused to ever call on me because she knew I knew. Right. And she wanted to deal with the other kids. So for 2 years, because I had the same teacher for 2 years, nobody would call on me to ask me a question, Right. But
was that unusual? You said you had the same teacher for 2 years. Was that unusual to have the same teacher for 2 years? What time period are we talking about here?
No, we're talking about, what year were we talking about? Like 1954.
1954. Okay.
Yeah. So that was, like I said, separate but equal schools, and the teachers had to, and the schools had to adapt to what they felt was important, that they had, control over. And when I say separate but equal, let me explain that a bit in case there are individuals who may have heard of it but really don't know what it is. That meant that there were essentially parallel school systems, one for Black kids and one for white kids. And all of the Black kids had, all the administration and teachers and support staff were Black. And the white school, just the opposite.
I'm deeply aware of the profound and lasting effects of separate but equal schools in the United States. This policy not only perpetuated racial segregation, but also created stark disparities in educational resources and opportunities. Generations of minority students have suffered from substandard facilities, inadequate funding, and limited access to quality education, exacerbating social and economic inequalities. Recognizing this painful legacy, we must advocate for the equitable, inclusive educational systems that promote justice, diversity, and equal opportunity for all students, regardless of color, sexual orientation, or other. Education is an opportunity that should be provided for everyone. These photography images capturing the stark reality of segregation in the USA serve as powerful reminders of a dark chapter in our history, revealing the deep divisions and inequalities that plagued our society. Through these visual narratives, we are confronted with the harsh realities of discrimination, inspiring us to strive for a more inclusive and better, as well as equal future.
But the one thing that I did know is that our teachers at our school wanted us to learn. That was it. You know, they wanted us to learn. They wanted us to know how to behave appropriately because they knew what we were going to face later. I mean, all of these things come to me now. I mean, I didn't realize it, but they were no more strict than my mother was, so it didn't bother me.
Right.
So I was used to it by that time.
So
And
did you feel like it was more of, even though it was education, did you feel like it was more of a community, you know, in terms of life preparation and education?
yes, oh yes, definitely. And to add to that, my mother told us that you don't misbehave on your way home either, because anybody that sees you has my permission to whoop your butt. I was like, oh my goodness, you know. So, you know, we had to behave. There was no other way for us to function, you know, if we wanted to be able to sit down for a week. So I went on, and like I said, I was a quick learner, so that became very obvious to all my teachers. And by 5th grade, we had like a safety patrol, where, you know, give some kids some responsibility for the school and that sort of thing. And so I was in it, and the next thing I know, they made me the captain of the, you know, had a little badge and everything. And it was our responsibility in the morning to raise the flag at the school. That was our responsibility. And then at the end of the day, to bring it down and to fold it appropriatly. And
what did two things? What did that mean to you then, and what does that mean to you in retrospect?
Well, in addition to doing the flag, I got selected to go when the kindergartners, the first graders took naps. I got to go in and supervise the room while the teacher went out. So there were things that I got assigned to do that were very special, and they taught me responsibility. Also, I gained leadership skills there, and I didn't realize that's what was happening. You know, I was, what, 11?
Right.
11. And so, but it did, you know, it really did instill those kinds of things in me at that early age. And then when I went to junior high school, because there were junior highs then, not middle schools, junior highs in 7th grade, 7th through 9th grade was junior high, and then 10th through 12th was high school. So when I went there, I mean, it was a whole new experience, except the fact that my sister was 2 years ahead of me, and a couple of the teachers I had taught her as well. And my introduction to the classroom, I hope you behave yourself like your sister did.
Oh.
Yeah. And I would smile and say, yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. What was I going to say? Knowing that she didn't talk very much, but I was going to have to try. But and at that point, I was very confident of my academic ability. It never occurred to me that there was something I couldn't learn or couldn't, you know, regurgitate when necessary. You know, that just never was an issue for me. So I went through junior high school, and I started music in 4th grade, by the way, which I think is also very helpful for children. They need to learn some kind of music, whether it's singing, an instrument, piano, whatever. I think it's very instrumental. It teaches you a kind of, I'm not even sure what I want to call that, but I've learned now that children who have music at an early age tend to do better in math. And I mean, I did very well in math, I might say, but but anyway.
Attribute that to the music you had.
Yes, of course.
But yeah.
That's what I'm thinking.
But you just happen to do it anyway, outside of the music. Do well in math, yeah.
Yeah, but I played it was a clarinet, so I played clarinet until I got to I think 9th grade, at which point I decided to stop playing an instrument and join the choir. And that's where I spent the rest of my high school years, in the choir. And it's funny because the music teacher and choir director didn't really know whether I should be alto or soprano, and I got to go back and forth. which was interesting, but confusing at the same time. But anyhow, that was good. And I also, foreign languages. I took French, 3 years of French, and I loved it. I loved it. I loved my English classes because I loved writing. I wrote poetry and short stories, and in addition to the other thing, essays and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I had in English that I did not like was debating.
Debating, really? Why?
Yeah,
why is that?
It's because it's like arguing to me. I mean, literally arguing, and I get too much emotion invested in it when I start to debate with someone. That was back then, even that was, I think, 10th grade when I had that experience. And after having public speaking in 9th grade, I thought, no, I can do this. I didn't do well. I mean, that was probably the one thing in gym that I did not do well in high school. But then when I thought about it, my math was really good. 9th grade, they had a citywide math contest. And I was in Algebra 1. I won first place in the city. 10th grade, for Algebra 2, they had a citywide math contest, but I learned that this year it was going to be integrated, and the previous year had not been integrated. And that was when I realized how different and unfair the educational system was. And I just totally freaked out.
I like that. Let's back up. So all this time, I just want to get everybody caught up on this. So you're saying that all this time you were going to all your experiences were in Black taught schools.
Yes.
Which was separate from the white schools. So at this point in your educational career and upbringing, you get to the 10th grade and you find out on something that you think is going to be even across the board. You probably hadn't even thought about it differently.
Right.
And then you go ahead.
And so the way I found out about it was our algebra teacher, and I had the same teacher for first and second year algebra, got a hold of a book that was being used by the kids in the white schools. And it was different and more advanced than the textbooks that we had at our school. And then when I began thinking about it, I remembered that we would get books that would appear to be new, and then inside you might see pencil marks on there. And that never occurred to me until this happened. That they were rebinding books that had been used and discarded by the white schools and giving them to the Black schools.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was about this time that the civil rights movement was underway. And as a matter of fact, there was coming up a march from Tennessee State University to the Capitol in Nashville. I never said that's where I was from, but that's where I was from, Nashville. And I decided I needed to go. I needed to participate in this because this wasn't fair, So I go home and I tell my mother, and she says, "No, you can't go." I'm like, "Well, yeah, I can." "No, you can't go because they're turning dogs on people and putting hoses on them, and you could end up in jail." And when I said I was going, I said we, because I included my sister in that. I'm thinking, she got to want to go too. So I just said we. I looked at her and she had this expression on her face like, "Why they put me in this?" And so when my mother said we couldn't go, I said, would it be fair for us to sit back, do nothing, while everybody else exposed themselves to whatever danger, trying to get laws changed that I would later benefit from? That's not fair. So then she called my father. They've been divorced for quite some time. And I hardly got to see him. Okay, so she calls him, he shows up, and he tells me that I can't go. I told her the same thing. I said, "Yes, I am. I'm going." Like, what do you think you are? And I gave him the same rationale. I said, "You benefit just as well as I would benefit in everybody else. So I have to go." So my poor sister came with me. And we marched from Tennessee State down to the state capitol building, which was probably, I'm thinking, somewhere between 6 and 8 miles. And we were singing things like, we shall overcome, all the way down there. There was no problem. There were no police walking, driving by us or anything. We were very peaceful. And we got down there and we listened to speeches. And one of them in particular that I remember was the Reverend Dr. not Martin Luther King, Kelly Miller Smith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who had worked with Martin Luther King, and he was pastor of the First Baptist Church in Nashville, which was one of the biggest, most prestigious Black churches in the city at that point. Brilliant man. And so we listened to the speeches and all that kind of stuff, and then we dispersed. But that was our participation, and I thought to myself, I know I can't push my mother any further than this. I better feel like.
How did that feel for you? How did that feel for you as a young person doing that, fighting for the cause?
I felt so good.
Yeah.
I felt so good. And I really wanted to do more, but I knew my mother would probably tie me up into the bedroom or something and not let me out. But I became very aware, and then I started reading. But the interesting thing to me was that the way I was raised, my mother's favorite phrase was, I don't care if you're white, black, blue, or green. You're a human being, and that's the way you treat people. And so that's how I grew up. And where she worked, I knew the people that she worked with. Most of them were white. A lot of them were Black, but they didn't treat me any differently than I thought they should treat me. So I never thought about it. It just never really occurred to me. And my mother didn't talk about it because at that time, she had gone through a lot that I later learned. I didn't know at that point. She had gone through a lot up to that point. And I thank her for not telling us about it so it would color our view of the world at that point. And we had to be able to learn it, because that's how people become prejudiced when they're children.
Right. Yes.
And so had she started telling us about all the terrible things that had happened to her while we were small, we would have been, aware, and it would have affected our psyche. I know it would have affected mine.
Right.
So I really appreciate that she did that and just made us go. And she also told us, you will take a typing class, because if you can't get a job doing anything else, you can get a job typing and being a secretary. So I don't care what you do, that's what's going to happen.
And that's interesting too. That's, things like that are sign of the times. And I want to go back to what you said. It's important to understand that parents, as a parent, you only can teach what you know.
Right.
And if you are in your, I don't want to say sane mind, but we understand why children turn out the way they turn. Because one, a lot of times parents have kids at a young age. They're still developing themselves. They experience things themselves, and they teach it to their kids, or their kids see it. So the kids absorb that, and then they go on to, do that in their own lives. Yeah. So someone like your mother, who had some experiences, she was able to bottle that up, keep it inside, but teach things in a way that kept your mind open.
Exactly.
Help to form who you are. And then you pass it on, and then you pass it on. Your view of the world becomes a lot more open and accepting, and you're in that mindset.
Right. It was so beneficial to me. And her insistence that we do our very best when we were in school and that sort of thing, and that she would accept nothing less, to the point that I was very confident in my ability to do any work that they presented to me in school, any of it. It didn't matter, And in my high school, you could have majors. My majors were math and science. And, I did well in both of them. So that's it. That was the kind of experience. I mean, we had teachers that, were grumpy, or, all those other kinds of things. I mean, they were human beings, so they had their own personalities and those kinds of things. But the one thing for sure that I always felt was that everything that they were doing was to make sure that we did well once we got out of that school. Right. That was what it was. Unfortunately, there were some kids that fell by the wayside and didn't make it all the way through, but on the way, they had to have learned some things. I
Right.
mean, there was no way you could not learn some
Which
things.
goes back to what we just mentioned. The aforementioned is, we don't know what was going on in their homes. So
Right.
maybe they weren't able, to finish school.
Exactly.
Maybe there were other obstacles there that had to do with their parents, the home life, the finances, the food, anything.
Yeah.
So,
And some of them, I knew that was the issue. I
Mhm.
mean, it was very obvious. I remember in elementary school, there were two girls that stand out in my mind right now. And one of them, everybody knew she was poor. And she was like embarrassed. She was not comfortable talking to other people or anything. And she would bring her lunch. It would be wrapped in newspaper. And she would always sit by herself by the window so she wouldn't have to look at anybody else. And so one day I felt badly. I mean, I always felt badly. So I go over and I decide I'm going to sit with her and try to talk to her. And she wouldn't talk. She wouldn't even look at me when I sat down. She just kept looking out the window and she didn't talk. And I felt so badly. I didn't know what I could do. I mean, here I was, maybe fourth grade. And then there was another one who was a very large girl for her age. And she, we were in fifth grade, she was 14. So she'd been left behind for a number of years.
Wow.
And, and I knew in both cases they had issues at home. I mean, it was clear. I mean, they didn't have to tell you. It was clear. If somebody comes and they have their lunch wrapped up in newspaper, what are you thinking? I mean, we weren't well off, but it wasn't to that point.
Right.
And she apparently had many more sisters and brothers than I ever had. So, it was not easy. And the other one was in a similar situation, that basically she ended up leaving because she had to go take care of the other kids.
What are the things on the other side of it all? You've been on the other side of education as administration.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things that you've done, when you see when you're faced with these challenges with students or with
Mm-hmm.
people seeking education? What are some of the things that you've done or that we can do to help?
Well, a couple of things I did. I managed to get grant proposals approved to give kids, adults, because when I ended up in Pittsburgh at the home of Rushton branch of Community College of Allegheny County, we had a lot of adults coming back to school. They were timid, but I thought they were very brave because coming from where they came from, I knew what was going to happen. People, their friends were going to turn against them and try to keep them from coming and that sort of thing. And so every new group that came in, because we brought them up to speed with their English, math, and even a little science so that they would be ready for the college courses because they weren't ready when they first came in. And I would go into each new class and talk to them and let them know that I'd been out of high school for 10 years before I even went to college. I said, and you know what? I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I said, because you can change your mind.
Absolutely.
And there's nothing to stop you from changing your mind. And there's nobody that can tell you that you can't do anything that you really want to do.
Right.
So I tried to build a rapport with them. I tried to hire for them the kinds of staff and teachers that adopted my philosophy about how you need to work with students who have less than they need, and so it turned out that a good number of them went on, at least got their associate's degrees and got jobs that paid them. So they were no longer on public assistance or any of those kinds of things, and I felt really good about that. And then now my youngest daughter ended up with some developmental disabilities, and I had her in Catholic school because I felt like the classes would be smaller and she'd get more attention. Well, that was a mistake. But one of the things that I did, I moved her from one school, which was predominantly white, to another school that was predominantly Black, both of them being Catholic. And there were things that were going on in the classroom at the first school that I was not pleased with. And that's why I took her out and put her in the other one. And the other one was right across the street from where I worked. So, and I met with the teachers. My mother was living with me by that time, and she went over and met with the teachers too. And excuse me, when before my mother passed away, I decided that there needed to be something to help the little kids, because if you don't help them while they're young, you're going to lose them,
During the
because
formative
you help
years.
them later.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So what I did was I decided to put together a homework clinic. And it would have been for anybody in the neighborhood, but I was thinking about my daughter and her learning issues. And that's how I wrote the proposal to get more money.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to having the homework clinic, there were a lot of gangs in the area of where I worked. And I was like, I lived in the area for one gang and worked in the area for another. But the important thing about that was once people walked in that door, that was neutral ground. So there were people from both gangs that came and went to classes there.
Oh, wow.
It's never an issue, never
Wow.
an issue. And but crime, with teenagers, youth was increasing in the area. So what I did was I decided to add a mentorship component to the homework clinic. So I would get high school kids to come and sit with the elementary school kids to help them individually, because there was a teacher that was responsible, but she couldn't go around individually. So I got the high school students to do that. They got paid. They also got a free college class to do that. This was all in the proposal that I had written, that I had gotten approved.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the summertime, for these same kids, or different ones from the homework clinic, maybe more came for the summer. I had a Math, Science, and Computer Institute and a Creative and Performing Arts Institute, so that they could choose, parents could choose whichever they wanted in, but they had mentors working with them there too. And,
I like that. And see, and that's part of the problem. And that's how these gangs get started, is because the idle time, and
exactly.
Kids don't have things to do that are extracurricular to, one, pique their interest, and two, keep them out of trouble.
Right.
So
and
yeah, that's brilliant. And make a little money. Right.
Yeah, that was
brilliant.
That was it. And I'm proud to say that we won an award for that program from
Congratulations.
ADT, the security company. There's a big plaque. I left it. I should have brought it with me. Big plaque on the wall that a program of excellence that we received the award for.
Beautiful.
And I was very proud of that. Yeah.
Congratulations. That's stellar. Yeah, that's stellar. Yeah, we need a lot more of those right now. And
exactly.
Kids would one, find ways to be creative, and two, gain a little bit more insight in the education that they need.
Well, the interesting thing about those two summer programs with the Math, Science, and Computer Institute, the kids started at second grade, and they're second through seventh grade. And at the end of the 6-week program, they had to put together a science project. Now, the second grade science project was real interesting.
I'm sure it was.
But they were great. And we had them, judges to present awards and that sort of thing, who would be people from the community. So to get them involved and see what could happen to those young people. And the creative and performing arts kids put on, they had, some of them did art that they had displayed, some of them did music, and some of them had a little skit that they participated in. And so they got to expose, their parents were, if they're able to come, they came, and any other family members and people from the teachers, they were invited, that they had at the regular schools, to come and see what they were capable of. So that was one of the highlights of my experience there. I just
well done
with that one. Yeah.
Well done. Where do you see education currently?
I think it's going to hell in a handbasket. Basically, that's what I think.
How do you mean?
Just to be brutally honest, that's exactly what I think. When I started looking at states and school boards banning books And that's the other thing. This sounds like 1700s or something.
Right. Yeah.
This is ridiculous.
Exactly.
There should not be anything that a child can't read.
Right.
If the parents don't want that particular child's parent, not somebody else's parent telling your child what they can't read.
Right.
And that's when I found out that one of the books that was banned was the story of Rosa Parks' life, I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
This is a real problem we're dealing with here.
That's a huge problem. I mean, I can understand, making some things age appropriate. Exactly. I can deal with that, but absolutely banning books and, being pulled off of bookshelves and not banned from being in libraries and things like that. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. Even if it's something that I really don't agree with subject wise, the freedom of speech, you're allowed to, put your book out there. I personally don't have to read it, but I should have access to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that the biggest impetus for all this is two concepts that these people who are voting to ban and to eliminate from schools are based on two things. Wokeism, and they don't know what woke is. Now, one of them can define it, but they said, we're not going to have any more woke programs around here. What is that really? And then the CRT. We don't want CRT in our elementary schools. They're not in elementary school. It's a law school course, which is graduate level. It has never been down at the elementary level.
Right. Yeah.
So, people are being gaslighted by all those folks, and it's a shame because there should be, I know that there are more people who oppose this than they are who are supporting it, but these people aren't speaking out, and you've got to be able to speak out and stand up for what you believe in. I'm in a way, I'm glad that I don't have any kids in school right now because I'd be something to deal with.
Right.
Messing with my babies.
Right. And, I think that, that's the other thing too, is people don't speak up for education.
Exactly.
They just, I don't even know what I'm trying to say. Education is important and parents have to have a hand in what is being taught,
right.
Especially when the world is changing so quickly. So we have to kind of moderate where we're going with our own education and what we have access to. So people have to speak up. Yeah.
Well, and people will say, well, the parents didn't have education. My mother didn't graduate from high school. Okay. My father didn't graduate. He went to 8th grade. That's it. But my mother and even my father, when I did see him, made education very important for us because they knew that without it, they had very hard time.
Right.
And so it doesn't mean that you have to have a college degree to help your child learn and have an open mind.
Right.
You just have to be supportive of it and you have to insist upon it and they will do what you ask them to do.
Right.
They have the choice, really.
Exactly. And now of course, we're at a different place, in life where technology is taking over. So you really have to have a higher education. Depending on what you want your life to be, you have to have life skills. You have to have, you may have to have knowledge of one thing, but you don't necessarily have to go through college and an organization to structure you in that way.
I think the country at that level is moving away from it.
Sure.
Yeah. They want you to have skills and knowledge in a certain area.
Right.
My thought is with my younger son in particular is that learn everything you can about everything you can, because the way that the world is going right now, you might change careers, not just jobs, careers 5 or 6 times before you're able to retire.
Right.
And you don't know what that's going to be. That's why you prepare yourself for everything you could think of. You got idle time, take a course in something, anything, just.
It's difficult. Even education is being outdated. We can talk about artificial intelligence, which we've, talked about here before, but artificial intelligence, you don't even, need to know that stuff. You need to, all you need to know is how to prompt something to give you the answers you need. So that's a whole nother education, a different type of education that you need in order to produce results. I think in the future with education and jobs, I think that you're going to be able to hire people for companies, and all they're going to have to know how to do is prompt certain AI tools. And, I can hire 5 random people. All you need to know is how to prompt something to get the results that you need to automate something. So that's going to be a whole nother wave and different type of education, I think, that's coming through.
The only fault I see with that is the same one that I saw when computers came into, like, my younger son. I think he was in 4th grade, and he made a spreadsheet presentation on computer with slides, PowerPoint. That's what I'm thinking. PowerPoint. I didn't know how to use PowerPoint right then. And then he had put music to this presentation. It was about some geographical thing he had to research. He did it on the computer. And I'm like, oh my goodness. But also when they started to use calculators in elementary school, then you're not going to learn the basics of math at that point in time.
No, you're not.
What happens if all the computers in the world die down for some reason? Who knows? The power goes out in the city or the country for 2 or 3 days or a week or whatever.
Well, I think that's pretty far-fetched, but if that does happen, we're going to end up in an apocalypse because everything's done. You know what I mean? Like the whole world is going to be immobilized. So, we think about, before I used to think about it like that, but now if that happens, we are definitely going to be in trouble. There's going to be looting, killing, stealing, like everything's going to happen. This is going to be done.
Which is another
reason a wrap.
Critical thinking being taught.
Critical thinking, that of course.
Yeah, you got to be able to
logical thinking,
of course, out of problems.
Of course,
and that's important. And you don't. I mean, it doesn't. Actually, when I think about it, I don't think it's taught necessarily in schools. It wasn't taught to me, obviously. Although I consider myself a really good problem solver, but I learned it by myself.
Right.
And then when I think about it, my kids learned it. And I don't know how they learned it. I guess they learned it from me telling them everything over again about the good stuff that happened in my education or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's crucial.
It is.
So many things that can occur.
I think those are parental things. Critical thinking starts with the parents. The parents kind of make them think critically as they're growing up.
Exactly.
For sure. You don't want
to give your kids all the answers.
Exactly.
It just doesn't make sense. They have to be able to use their little brains up there for something.
Right. Well, all this said and done, what are your final thoughts on education and where it was to where it is today? Any final thoughts?
Well, let's see. For me, I think I appreciate the fact that I had the opportunity to go to school with people with teachers and staff who had my best interest at heart. There were places later on, like college and graduate school, where, because my undergraduate was predominantly Black and my graduate was predominantly white. And there were very different kinds of dynamics going on in both of those. But from my early education and high school education, I became confident of my ability to learn. I was confident that the people who were teaching me really had my best interest at heart. That prepared me pretty much, in addition to my mother telling me to problem solve. I mean, we'd ask her questions and she bought Encyclopedia Britannica. You got a question? Look it up.
Look it up. Right.
And so, but these days, I don't think, it's like education is not all that important. People try to make it more important by banning books, and that's not making it important. Those aren't the kinds of issues that kids need to learn.
Right.
They need to learn how to think, how to speak, how to calculate, how to use the technology. They need to learn all of those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
And in some situations, it's true that it happens. But others, I just don't have a lot of hope for, unless someone comes along or some group comes along and becomes more vocal about what needs to be done for kids and eliminating all this negative stuff that's going on with the parents.
Right.
You know, that's power playing that they're doing.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll leave them on that note. I have hope for the future, you know, in the ever-changing world that we live in, and hopefully someone will find the light and help us find out a better way to educate people and get everybody on the same track. I also want to have you back because you opened up another can of worms that I want to talk about. That's all Black institutions versus white institutions when you're a person of color, and how that affects you in your life. So please come back to the show for that. Everyone, please make sure you tune in. How can we get in touch with you? I don't know if you like followers or if you just want them to tune back in to when we continue this conversation, which is great too.
Well, they can tune into the conversation, but also, I guess, now this is the first time I've ever used this. DM me on Instagram.
There you go. She has an Instagram, everybody. What's your handle on Instagram?
My handle is Howse.47, and that's HOWSE 47.
There you go. So everybody, make sure you follow her at Howse47 on Instagram. She's on the gram, y'all. She's on the gram. Fran Howse, I want to thank you for joining me for this episode of OneMicNite. Everybody, if you like this episode, please go down, leave a comment, follow us on YouTube, watch the live talkbacks every Tuesday night. New episodes coming up. I'm so happy that you're along with me on this journey. Next episode coming up, we're going to be talking about the Harlem International Film Festival, where I was again, part 2, all the talkbacks and the incredible films that I moderated. So please stay tuned. This is OneMicNite. Follow the show, OneMicNite. You can always DM me at Marcos Luis, MarcosLuis. Until then, stay well. See you next time.